Cool. This is originally read only, but I just want to vocalize it because I know some of you have left feedback on it. Thank you, Michael and Rob, for leaving some thoughts and notes on the workflow handbook merge requests. So you might have already seen it, you might have not. On the managed monthly call, I've been working on a merge request to try to capture basically our existing workflow and how we can try to have that handbook page, our stage page, serve as a reference guide for how we do different things in terms of process, breaking down issues and planning and so on. So this is kind of that final call because I am really pushing hard to have this merge this week. So thank you for those who have already put feedback. Others don't feel like you are compelled to, but this is your chance to like get it in the first iteration. So yeah, just wanted to vocalize that again. And if there's no thoughts on that or anything like that, Ezekiel, you can take it away.
Sure. I was just leaving a little bit more space just in case. Yeah, I guess the things I put in are just kind of more like FYIs. So one thing in particular is I noticed that we actually have a guide for the Vue 3 migration. So it just lists some kind of general things to look out for in the general code base at the moment with Vue.js in respect to migrating to Vue 3. So just little gotchas that we can look out for. I've only kind of picked up on it because of the a couple of reviews I've done recently at the big Frontend. But yeah, I just recommend kind of having a look at it and probably keeping tabs on it in the future because I assume it'll be one of those pages that changes quite frequently as new deprecations appear. So yeah, that's just a little FYI. And the second one is that analytics is now jQuery free completely. So the final stage was getting rid of our jQuery dropdowns and replacing them with the GitLab UI dropdowns, which went in about a week ago, I think. So that's been kind of nice to see. It's one less dependency. And one thing I'll point out is if you do go down the route of using the new components, so you'll often see the syntax where we use GL new whatever component name is. Kushal made a really good point about aliasing the imports, aliasing it in the way that it should appear once the final component is in. This just kind of helps reduce the amount of code we have to touch when we do go to replace this new component with the final component.
No, that's awesome. Congrats. It's worth throwing a celebration when we can finally lay GL dropdown to rest. Just because, yeah, that and filter bar and so many other legacy components. But it's good news to hear that Analytics is jQuery free. So congrats.
That's
sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying that's really cool. Nice work on jQuery. I know how much of a pain that can be to get rid of. So that's really cool. I have some experience with doing migrations using, wow, I'm blanking on the name right now, but basically a structured programming way of doing migrations. I forget what it's called right now. It's been a while since I've used it. CodeMods, thank you. So if that seems like a worthy subject to if there's a lot of places that we need to transfer or like do changes, those can be really helpful. I don't know if you have experience with it, but I'm happy to support that if that's something that we could see being helpful.
I think
Certainly
that's
something to
really
consider.
Good point.
Yeah, I know Ilya had used it at one point. Ilya from Import had used it at one point. I can't recall exactly for what, but it's good that we have unmanaged two people with experience with it. So that's one thing to consider. I don't know. I would appreciate if someone could find perhaps if there's an epic to sunset some of these components, and then perhaps if not, create an epic to track such a thing, and then propose something like code mods to as a strategy for getting us closer.
I have a feeling there's definitely an epic for the jQuery migration. So I'll have a look, see if I can track that down again. But
That's
yeah, I
true.
think
It's
it
called
would be good
jQuery
to,
to source or whatever it ended up being.
yeah,
This week.
something like
Yeah. Would be good if you could also link those MRs or issues to that epic, so we can keep track of whatever work was already done in that topic. I think that's exactly how it's named.
I think I said it 3 times to Tim because he said if someone can say it 3 times, we can keep it. And so I said jQuery to source, jQuery to source, jQuery to source. And I was like, so does that work? Anyways, I'm just writing some notes down for mentioning this in the epic, but oh, and I have the next point. So I guess you'll just listen to me type. All right, thank you for listening to me type. That's awesome. We did have a couple notes on the Vue 3 migration guide. I did mention or leave the thought that I wonder if we can lint some of this. Martin, do you want to vocalize your part?
For the linters?
Yes, for the migration guide.
Yeah, I remember we wanted to introduce linters for enforcing the shorthand syntax, for example, for name slots and other parts in the code base. That was a while ago. But then we ran into issues with updating our linters, and we went down the rabbit hole where we would have to update like a whole bunch of dependencies. And then I think this effort stopped, but I'm not sure. Probably we already updated them, so might be worth to pick it up again. I'll take a look if I can find the issue and link it in the document.
Awesome. No, that'd be cool. Part of the thought is that it's hard for us to keep track of the changes on a specific handbook page or docs page. So obviously automating a lot of the linting would help train us to learn that habit a little bit better as we change the code. But yeah. Cool. Any other thoughts on those 2 topics before I jump to my next point? Cool. So as of earlier today, this morning or evening, depending on what time zone you're in, I think we launched the first experiment in Manage, definitely an import. So we have an experiment running right now in production for 50% of the audience to show a new project creation UI. And I could share my screen and show you that. So I will do that right now. So thumbs up if you can see my screen. Cool, thank you. So the new create project. So the idea is that these tabs don't perhaps surface or bring the best discovery into the different options you have when creating a project. And so we have given it much a more visually appealing treatment to it. And so we actually have this running as an experiment, meaning that we can A/B test stuff, which is something I'm very happy about, very passionate about, to be able to experiment and more importantly, have data to actually influence our decisions. Of course, you don't want to be completely data driven, but it's very important, I think, to have some data that may be a little bit more telling than complaints via issues and things like that. But what's really cool about this, there's an experimentation guide that I've linked to in the agenda that goes into more detail about this, but it gives us some really cool things in terms of like percentage segmentation, where you can expose this experiment or this new feature to 10% of the entire audience, a specific group, whether it's GitLab org or some perhaps customer that wants to try something out on gitlab.com. And also one thing that's also cool here is that because I'm not getting this experiment, you can actually force it with a query parameter using the experiment key. So if I do query parameter force experiment equals new create project UI, you'll actually be able to go to that B version. And so this is what that looks like. So the hypothesis is if we can bring more discovery, some more visibility about the other options you can use to create new projects, will users engage more with importing projects? So the idea is that can we encourage more users to import projects perhaps instead of creating blank ones, and then perhaps like doing a git push to a new remote, which would be this blank repository. So the flow beyond that is exactly the same. You just go from one panel to the other. I was a little hesitant at first because now when you're creating a blank project, which is my typical use case, you're now another screen away from that because you have to click into it. But again, we'll see what the data looks like. The experiment's only been live for a few hours. So I'm currently right now building the Periscope SciSense dashboard to track these events. And so I've included a little screenshot of what that looks like as of 4 hours of data. So you can see for sure, looking at this, I'll just move it over to here. Hopefully you can see the agenda, or I could just show the dashboard itself. No, it's fine. I'll put it at the agenda. So you can see here, obviously there's more friction on the experimental group creating blank projects because you now have one extra screen. So that's already being a very apparent behavior. But what's also interesting is that you are seeing more down here in the experimental group, they are importing a bit more as well. Of course, it's very early to tell. You'd want to leave this open for at least a couple of weeks to get statistical significance before drawing conclusions. But I'm just really excited that we have this capability now to be able to get data on and track what users are doing, to be able to see if what we're improving, what we're doing is actually having a real effect on things. So I just wanted to share that because it's personally exciting for me, but also if you feel compelled, or if you feel like there's certain features or things you're working on that might benefit from being an experiment, maybe consider proposing that. And I'd be happy to help with that. Obviously, there's a lot of documentation around it already, but if you need help with getting chat ops set up to be able to enable the feature flags and things like that, just let me know.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, especially for the analytics group, I guess, because we recently talked a lot about A/B testing and what options we would have in this regard. So thanks for sharing that. That's really interesting and super exciting. I think we had one use case, but we didn't really follow up on that. We recently implemented the horizontal navigation for value stream analytics, but then on the other hand, we decided, hey, what's the thing, what's the KPI that we would like to measure? It's just a UI element. So for us, this was not the perfect use case. So we're still looking for a first use case that makes sense for us to implement. But it's great that we have the infrastructure in place to actually implement it. And the other thing I really like about this this change, or this first experiment that you implemented, and Ilya participated. I guess Ilya was doing most of the front-end work here. Is I'd really like to draw some attention to the MR, because I think Ilya did a really great job in terms of going for the boring solution, because he managed to reuse a lot of functionality from the previous version, which is not written in Vue. So he was kind of mixing the old Haml Vue implementation, which doesn't seem like the perfect fit in the long run. But since we want to, or eventually we might want to steer back and don't implement the new version at all, I think this is a perfect compromise. So really great job on that one.
Yeah, and thanks for highlighting that. Obviously, of course, huge thanks to Ilya for implementing the new project UI. And it was definitely a discussion on how much work we wanted to invest in it. And you'll see it in the experiment guide as well, that you may have to communicate this to your maintainer, especially because it's an experiment, because you are building, well, I like to think we do this anyways, but perhaps labeling it as an experiment helps too. And I know we're over time, so hopefully we're okay to go over a little bit. But I think by framing it as an experiment, we're basically saying this is temporary. We don't know yet if we want to invest the full effort into that final polished MVC. And I know polished and MVC may not go perfectly well together, but basically, could we save a little bit of time and effort not going for the 100% feature and do most of it and see if users even like it or engage with it? And if that's the case, like, then we can invest further into it, right? That's kind of the idea around A/B testing. Of course, smaller changes don't really apply as much, but if we can, so when you frame that, when you put your merge request up for review, you're going to have to say, hey, this is an experiment. Like, the code isn't going to be the cleanest. And that was the same conversation that Ilya and I were having in terms of, do we copy the controllers entirely? Do we create new controllers entirely? Do we create view components out of it? And the idea was that, no, we want to, if anything, this is more important to make it more MVC and with minimal changes to the code itself, so that we're not investing too much time for something that we know is more temporary, ephemeral, that type of thing. But thanks, Martin, for linking to that merge request. And yeah, I'm just really excited about it. I like having more data to influence our decisions. So I'm excited to see what we can do with it.
That's a really interesting way of working with this. I just branched over the documentation that you linked to. Seems fairly straightforward. Yeah, I'll definitely be looking a little bit more into that to try to understand how much goes into it, and maybe looking at that merge request.
If it were okay, because I know we have a couple more points, I can give you a quick TLDR on it. It functions exactly the same as feature flags because it's built on the same Flipper gem that we use for feature flags. It's just a different portion of that. And to give you a little bit of brief history, this is totally not a TLDR now, but I'm going to explain a little bit of the history behind it because I think it's important. We've always had the capability to do A/B testing, but we've been slowly piecing it together because we had Flipper, but we didn't have chat ops enabled for the percentage setting. We didn't have a good way of labeling experiments. So every experiment actually has experiment percentage appended to the feature flag key. We implemented Snowplow, and Martin and team spent a lot of time implementing tracking events, but they were going somewhere, but we couldn't exactly pull all the data and actually report on it. And then once Periscope got introduced, then we had that kind of last piece to be able to do so. And so, shout out to Growth for helping to connect it all together. But basically, to implement it in the code, it's very similar to, instead of feature enabled, it's experiment enabled. And most of the functionality works very similar to feature flags, in addition to pushing front-end feature flags to the global object. So if you know how to do feature flags, you can do experiment flags. And then to finish connecting it, it's just putting up the dashboard to be able to report on the results. That's a brief summary.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Then Martin, I think you have the next point.
Yeah, this is just a quick FYI. So there's some discussions going around updating our handbook, the wording in our handbook, which is relevant for becoming a maintainer. So currently, there was some misunderstanding apparently, because at the moment it says we require 50% approvals or no objections. But the problem with that is, especially had a case, which is the context link I provided, where a trainee maintainer opened an issue and maintainers haven't responded in time because they were busy doing other reviews and stuff like that. And then it was open for more than 5 days. We only had one approval, but no significant objections. And then the manager decided, hey, let's move forward. We can merge this MR. So technically the decision was correct because that complies with what we have in our handbook, but that's not how we treated it in the past. So we always required at least or more than 50%. So we are updating the wording. So just to avoid confusion in this regard, check out the MR and maybe also the context if you're interested in, especially Ezekiel, and since that also affects you and your approvals. And obviously everyone else who wants to become a maintainer.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Cool. I don't know about you, Ezekiel, but my interesting links are probably better for not or probably better to avoid the recording. I don't know how you feel about mentioning this. I can stop the recording if you want.
Yeah, that's probably not a bad idea.